Okay, everyone. I am Christy Del Castillo-Heggie, Dr. Christy Del Castillo-Heggie, one of the co-founders of the Fed is Best Foundation. And today we are starting off a series by Fed is Best featuring different mothers, different parents with different experiences with regard to infant feeding. We are doing this series to try to capture what the reality is for mothers, what their experiences are, the way things and how they experience, how they're supported can lead to different outcomes, and we want to capture what parents want from their health professionals, their supporters, in order to succeed as much as possible. Excuse the children noise background. We're doing it just regular life. It's very casual, and we just want to capture life as it is. So we have Steph Montgomery here with us. And Steph, okay, so, and she's a longtime supporter of Fed is Best. So Steph, tell me a little bit about yourself, tell our audience about who you are and how you came here and your experiences.
Well, my name is Steph Montgomery, and I spent much of my career working in public health, mostly on the research and grants administration side. And I became a mom, and now I'm a writer and an advocate, and I work from home or try to work from home with my kids. And I came into contact with Fed is Best initially through Christy's letter. Christy wrote a letter and posted it online, and I read her story, and it was so similar to mine. And I had written about my own breastfeeding experiences and my own breastfeeding failures considerably, and I contacted her and I said, hey, my story is like yours. I support you. What can I do? And I had known Jody, the other co-founder, through some online science parenting groups, and I just wanted to do whatever I could to support Fed is Best, because I don't want anybody to ever have the experience that I did, and I don't want any babies to starve and to die from lack of care.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, and I have 5 kids, so you'll probably hear them in the background as well. That's okay. And I had different experiences. 3 of my children I birthed, and I had 3 vastly different experiences feeding them. And I think 3 different experiences with my own self-confidence and efficacy to feed them based on the kind of support and healthcare that I received.
Well, tell me about that. I mean, you can start from the beginning. What was your experience? What were your expectations? And what did you ultimately experience during your infant feeding journey?
Absolutely. So when I was pregnant with my first child, I have to admit I was very crunchy, as they say. I planned to exclusively breastfeed, of course, because that's what you did. I worked for a women's health organization at the time. I worked primarily with nurses and doctors. I was very well educated. I had a master's degree. I took all of the courses on breastfeeding that the hospital offered, that our local lactation consultant offered, that my midwife's office offered. I read all of the research about what I thought was the truth about how you should best feed your child. And I thought it was going to be easy. I had so many friends who had breastfed. I now have learned that exclusive breastfeeding wasn't something that all of them achieved. But I thought from the outside, it looked like everybody has a successful breastfeeding experience. It's effortless, it's painless, it's enjoyable, it's wonderful. It's the only way you can really bond with your child. And so I bought that line, hook, line, and sinker. I was a huge breastfeeding advocate. I judged my friends that didn't breastfeed. I had a coworker who was pregnant. She was due this exact same day as me, and she was planning to formula feed from the start because she had had a horrible experience breastfeeding. And I judged the hell out of her. Like, I thought, excuse my French, I thought that she was doing a disservice to her baby, and I didn't understand. So flash forward, have my baby. She was 5 days overdue. I was induced. I was in labor for 22 hours, back labor. I resisted an epidural until the very end because I thought that it would ruin my chances of breastfeeding. Like, everything was about successfully breastfeeding. And that's so sad. Like, nothing, it wasn't about recovering. It wasn't about doing the best that I could for my child. It was about breastfeeding and having this natural labor and having this beautiful motherhood experience. She was born, latched right away. I had a whole host of lactation consultants and nurses come into the room, and they just told me, oh my gosh, you're doing so well. Oh my goodness, you know exactly what you're doing. Oh, I can't believe she's eating for 45 minutes on each side every 2 hours. That's great. And I didn't know that she was suckling for 45 minutes on each side because she was freaking hungry and I wasn't producing anything. I did this awful routine where I was up the first 24 hours of her life, and I got very little sleep. The nursing staff came in to discharge me. My midwife's office encouraged people to go home after 24 hours as soon as their baby was cleared. Well, she was healthy. I was healthy. The nurse came in to discharge us and did a bilirubin test on her forehead. And she thought the equipment was malfunctioning because I couldn't get a reading. And she looked at my charting of feedings and said, oh, well, she's eating well. You can go home. Well, we realized later that the equipment was malfunctioning because her bilirubin was really high. It was too high for it to read. And they told me that later. So we went home. I just wanted to go home. I hated being in the hospital. Somebody was interrupting me like every 15 minutes and people were manhandling my breasts. And I felt like it was dehumanizing. I really had never been treated that way. I was 30 years old, almost 31 years old. I was a professional. I had never been talked to the way that the nursing staff talked to me. They talked to me like I didn't know what I was doing. And so I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And I wanted to leave immediately. And they said, you have to stay for 24 hours. So we stayed for 24 hours. She was cleared to leave. We had no plan for how to know if she was eating well, how to know if breastfeeding was working out. They sent me home with a guide that said to count her diapers, to feed her every 2 to 3 hours, but not to wake her up because you never wake up a sleeping baby. And so I did what they said. The first night home was her second night of life, and she had a stereotypical second night syndrome night. She cried. I couldn't put her down. I had to have her latched to my breasts at all times. I didn't sleep at all. At one point in the middle of the night, I told my husband that I wanted to call the doctor, and he was like, oh, babies just cry. Babies cry. It's not a big deal. The next morning, I called the lactation consultant. She said, sounds like you had a typical second night at home. Good luck. Keep feeding her. I called our doctor, who was on vacation, it was like all of these things were stacked against us. And I left a message with her answering service, but again, no one said, hey, bring her in for a weight check or bring her in for a weighted feed. Like, no one said, come in. I called the La Leche League and they said, whatever you do, do not give her formula. It will ruin your chances of breastfeeding. And so here I am, just like a new mom, hadn't slept in 2 days, and like was just trying to do what I could. I didn't take that for an answer. I called the hospital back and said, hey, I need to see somebody today. So we took her to the hospital-based lactation consultant. They weighed her. She had lost weight. She said, oh, well, you can try giving her some formula, and that's okay, but make sure that you only give her like 15 milliliters of formula at a time. And here's a supplemental nursing system, and you can give it to her with this supplemental nursing system. That way she won't get used to a bottle. And so what I want you to do is I want you to feed her on the breast, both sides. Then I want you to feed her formula at your breast with the supplemental nursing system. And then I want you to pump. And then I want you to do it again in 2 hours. And like, it was, I can't even tell you, I think they should use triple feeding for torture.
Yes.
Because I would have told anyone anything that they wanted to know. It was horrible. And we laugh about it now, but like, I don't know why I agreed to do that. Like, it's insanity. Like, nobody would expect a man to forego sleeping 24 hours a day and hook a part of his body up to a pump that hasn't even been proven to increase supply. And like, I don't know, so my experiences with this lactation consultant, who was an RN, who was an employee of the hospital where I delivered, who seemed to know what she was talking about, it was like I would have agreed to do anything to breastfeed. Flash forward a day, we bring her in for a weight check. The nurse lactation consultant said she's losing too much weight. She's not getting anything. Even the formula isn't helping. And we took her in for a blood draw to have her bilirubin tested. And then they called us from the lab and said, you have to take her to the emergency room. Her bilirubin is too high. She had lost 20% of her weight. She was so jaundiced and so dehydrated that they could hardly start an IV. They gave her a formula as soon as we were admitted. We were readmitted to the NICU, to a private room because she had been out of the hospital, but they didn't have space in the PICU, and they didn't really have the experience in the PICU to care for her. So they wanted her in the NICU, and they gave her a bottle of formula, and she drank it so fast that I immediately broke down. I started crying. I was like, how is this possible? I've been feeding her every 2 hours. How is this possible? The NICU staff was wonderful. The emergency room doctor that admitted her was wonderful. It was the first time that anyone had said, it's okay to give her formula. She needs formula. It was the first time anyone said that, that this weight loss, like everyone had said so far, oh, well, of course she lost weight. You had an IV. Of course she lost weight. You expect that with a baby. Of course she lost weight. And I'm like, well, you've seen the pictures of her on day 5. I had put her in a cloth diaper and set her on the bed, and we had a white bed sheet, and she just looks orange. But I didn't know, and I was exhausted, and I blamed myself for a really long time for her starving. Because I didn't know what newborn skin was supposed to look like. I didn't know that how much weight loss was too much, and I didn't see it. When you look at her newborn picture, and she's this pink chubby baby, and then you look at her 5-day-old picture, you don't see that in your head. People are like, well, how could you let your baby starve? Didn't you notice that she was getting too thin? And I'm like, what? You're with her 24/7. You don't see those subtle changes at all. So she got care. She got really wonderful care. She started gaining right away. And we kept up supplementing, and I kept up triple feeding for an exhausting 3 months. Yeah, I know, right? Oh my gosh, like.
Oh, wow.
With the supplemental nursing system, because I was still convinced that I would eventually be able to exclusively breastfeed her. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to give her that. And the lactation consultant I saw prescribed Domperidone, or she called my midwife's office to prescribe Domperidone. So I paid like $240 a month for Domperidone. I had to go to a compounding pharmacy. And while I was there, they said, don't tell anyone that we're giving this to you for breastfeeding, because we could lose our pharmacy license.
It's crazy.
And, you know, in the middle of all of this, my grandpa passed away. I took a breast pump and a newborn, and for a 14-hour car ride to go to his funeral. And while I was there, my cousins I'm on the younger side of all of my cousins, and my cousins were like, it's okay to do both breastfeeding and formula feeding. And like, oh, well, you're still nursing. That's awesome. But, you know, you don't have to, or, oh, well, that's great because I only did it for 6 weeks, or I only did it for 2 weeks. And I was like, why don't we talk about this? Like, we talk about duration of breastfeeding as if it's like, if you don't do it for a year or longer, you're a horrible parent. And it's hard. It's hard to breastfeed for a week. It's hard to breastfeed for 6 months. It's hard to breastfeed for a year. I can't even tell you, like, I thought it was going to be so easy, because that's what they make it look like. And that's the messaging they give us. We talk about breastfeeding in terms of like, as if women aren't capable of making decisions unless they think it's a wonderful thing. Like, unless they think it's peaceful and a way to bond and beautiful and magical, and the best for your baby and the healthiest choice. And unless we tell them only the rosy stuff, like, they're not going to choose to breastfeed. It's very condescending, and almost as if they don't trust women to make the best choices for their families, as if they think that if women don't think it'll be easy, women won't choose to breastfeed.
Right.
So I guess I think that answers the question that you're going to ask last is, while we communicate with people, with new parents or prospective parents about how they're going to feed their child, like, I wish that we did it trusting women to make the best choice for their family, and to know that they can change their mind, and that making the choice to switch to formula because you need to or because you want to is perfectly fine. It's wonderful even to have those choices and to have the ability to feed our babies when our bodies don't work right. You had asked, or maybe I'm asking for you, like, what was one thing that you remember hearing that stands out in your mind about infant feeding? And I'm actually going to share a positive one. After my second child was born, I had a completely different experience, and I breastfed him for 8 months. And I combo fed. I supplemented right away because he was jaundiced, and but we were able to know what was happening. And I actually told the hospital staff at this baby friendly hospital, initiative hospital, like, I am going to supplement with formula because my baby needs it because I don't produce enough. And I remember the lactation consultant saying, oh, well, you don't know that. Sometimes the second time around, you're more successful. And I was like, well, that's fine. But right now he's losing weight and I don't want him to have the same experience as my daughter. But the thing that stands out for me was actually seeing a private lactation consultant. There's a nonprofit in our town that was started by a physician and a pediatrician and a lactation consultant that provides services on a sliding fee scale. And the hospitals rely on her staff to really provide most of the outpatient lactation consultants in town. And when I went in to see her, I told her my story about what happened with Caitlin, and Caitlin was 3.5 at the time, so I'd had some time, and I told her what we'd been through and how much shame I felt about stopping breastfeeding at 3 months, and I told her that I wanted desperately to breastfeed Ian, and she looked at me and she said, oh, well, honey, you can breastfeed Ian. You might have to give him formula too, and that's okay. You just need to redefine what success means for you. And hearing that success for this lactation professional who's a physician, who's a breastfeeding medicine physician, who started an organization to help people breastfeed, for her to tell me, like, you can feed your baby formula and breastfeed at the same time, and that's great. And you get to define your own version of what breastfeeding success is, and it doesn't have to be exclusive breastfeeding. And in fact, it might not ever be possible for you to exclusively breastfeed a baby, and that's like your version of what's normal for you and what's okay for you and your family. And with her help, I breastfed for 8 months. I was able to produce way more. She doesn't prescribe Domperidone. She doesn't have parents take supplements. She introduced me to power pumping. She didn't want me to use an SNS. She said a supplemental nursing system is messy and exhausting and adds an extra step. Like, you don't need that. You have a newborn and a toddler. Like, you don't need all that. Babies do fine breast to bottle, bottle to breast. And she said, I see them every day. She said something like 70% of her clients have low milk supply. 70% of her clients have low milk supply. And most of them aren't able to exclusively breastfeed. And she said some of them can eventually get there, but it's an awful lot of work, especially when you have other kids at home. And so that was just, it was so dramatically different, Christy. It was so different. And that's the kind of care that we need.
Mm-hmm. That's the kind of care we need. Exactly.
And so I just wanted to add a little thing at the end. And I don't know if you're going to use this or not, but when I got ready to have my third baby, I had been through all of this before. Um, and I thought, okay, well, this time I'm going to approach childbirth and breastfeeding and formula feeding differently. Like, I am going to do whatever works for our family. And when we have to change our mind or when we want to change our mind, like that's going to be reality for us. I mean, my husband and I had 4 kids between us, and we were getting ready to have number 5. And we knew that life was going to be busy and that we needed to find a way to make our family work. And if that meant that he did some of the feedings at night and so I could get some sleep, if that meant combo feeding full time for however long I wanted to, if that meant only formula feeding, like, great. Luckily, I had you. And so I had you and Jody and the Fed is Best Foundation. And I walked into the hospital with the Fed is Best guide, and I showed it to the nursing staff. I had a little bit of a different experience because I got hurt, and so I had to be admitted to the hospital a week before delivery. So I met all of the postpartum nurses before I was postpartum. And in a baby-friendly hospital, initiative hospital, every single nurse that I talked to was pro-supplementation. Every single nurse that I talked to hated the baby-friendly hospital initiative. Every single nurse I talked to said Fed is best, and you need to feed your baby. And when I showed them the guide, they were amazed that it had been created by a lactation consultant and a physician, but they weren't surprised because they said this is like the dirty little secret of being at a hospital. She said, we tell women, I'll take your baby to the hospital or to the nurse's station so you can get some sleep. We tell women it's okay to supplement, just don't show the lactation consultant. We tell women, hey, your baby is huge. My son was born at 37 weeks, 5 days, and he was 9 pounds, Christy. And I know you know this because I texted you from the hospital and you're like, that's a big baby. You need to have his glucose tested. Luckily, they tested his blood glucose, and despite formula and nursing, it was too low. And so he was admitted to the NICU for a day and a half. But that's the way it's supposed to work, right? Like, they did the appropriate screening. He didn't have to have lights for bilirubin because of supplementing. He had to have some IV fluids. He had to have some scheduled feedings. He had to have some glucose, but like, he did fine, and he was discharged the next day, the same day I was, you know. That's the way it's supposed to work. Yeah. And the difference is nursing, and the difference is moms being supported in making their own choices, and the difference is having organizations like Fed is Best telling me, like, you can supplement that baby.
So much. Yes. I mean, I'm so glad. I'm so glad things worked out and that you got the support you needed. I mean, that's what we want for everyone. And also thank you for everything you've done for the organization.
Oh,
getting the best out, you know. I mean, that's what it boils down to, getting the real, what real moms go through and what really happens, and how you achieve what is best for every mom, baby, family. That's what matters ultimately. Thank you so much, Steph, and thank you for getting the word out, writing about breastfeeding. through all your different media contacts, and I'm really looking forward to what's coming up, and to publish this on Fed's Best. And thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Okay, you too.